Really is an exciting topic that we're going to talk about today, and we heard from General Fogarty this morning on this very importance of us bringing these capabilities together on the battlefield as we work through it. We heard it from General Nakasone as well, and so we have a fantastic panel today that's going to take us through that. But when we look at combining these capabilities on the battlefield, it will make a difference whether we will win or lose in the future, and we know that. All are necessary in defending our networks, and we have to bring each of the pieces together. It was very interesting in the green room meeting with our panelists just shortly, talking about how these are all interrelated and important in our delivery of them. And when I think back about my time in Operation Iraqi Freedom and Enduring Freedom, the one thing that kept me awake at night 24/7 was our ability to be able to have secure, unimpeded access to the electromagnetic spectrum in a truly contested and congested environment. And it was difficult to get the leadership to understand that challenge of this is real, it's physics, you can't cram anything more in a band than what we were doing. And I clearly remember when General Meigs called me, and for those of you that have worked for General Meigs, that was a challenge, but he was at JIATO at the time. He calls me in Iraq and he says, "Susan, I have a JIATO solution on the runway. I need to get it in the air." And I said, "I understand, sir, but I have zero spectrum to give you. Something has to come down." And that's a leadership decision. I'll do whatever you want, but we need to have that problem. So one of my bright engineers was able to come up with a chart that showed how much of the band we were using that was causing the most problems, and you could not cram another single thing in there. General Abizaid got it, came back to the Pentagon and showed that chart to General Pace and said, "We need to fix this now if we're going to continue to be able to operate freely in this war." And of course, unfortunately, the problem still exists today. And now let's add operating in a cyberspace to ensure we're winning that information operations war, and that's what we have to get after. I recently read an article by Sam Cohen, and I absolutely agree with him when he says, "Adversaries are developing cyber and electronic warfare capabilities to conduct information operations against U.S. systems that will likely threaten the speed and accuracy of military communications, intelligence, and data sharing challenges, while maliciously altering or stealing the information itself. These capabilities often complementary effects, which means integrating cyber and electronic warfare could provide a stronger protection and attack capacity for our U.S. military assets." So with us today, as I said, we have a well-qualified panel to discuss these challenges. It is my honor to first introduce our panel chair, Brigadier General Rick Engel. General Engel is the Deputy Commanding General for Operations, the United States Army Cyber Command. He has commanded at all levels to include 1st Battalion, 1st Special Operations Forces Group, Airborne in Okinawa, and most recently is the Deputy Commanding General, 1st Special Forces Command. There's no one more qualified to talk about operating in a congested and contested environment than General Engel, with his many deployments to Bosnia, Kosovo, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, Horn of Africa, and the Philippines. Our first panel member is Colonel Eddie Paruchabutr. Yes. Or thankfully, we're going to call him Eddie for short. Colonel Paruchabutr is a psychological operations officer currently serving as the Director of Information Operations at United States Army Special Operations Command, USASOC. His priority is to enable Army Special Operation missions with information-related capabilities. His overall responsibilities include oversight and proponency for manning, training and equipping the Army Special Forces, psychological operations, civil affairs, and special operations aviation formations. And our cleanup batter, Dr. Darren Linvill, very exciting to have him on the panel and to talk about the research that he is doing, is an associate professor in the Department of Communications at Clemson University. He teaches on issues related to civil discourse and social media, and his research focuses on online disinformation. He has spent the last 2 years studying the work of the Russian Internet Research Agency with Dr. Patrick Warren, also at Clemson, and their work on the IRA has been subject of articles in the Washington Post, NBC, National Public Radio, the Wall Street Journal, and Nate Silver's 538, to name just a few. So with that, I now would like to turn this over to our panel chair, General Engel.
Thanks, General Lawrence, and good morning, everybody. I look at the folks up here on the panel, and I want to say thanks to Dr. Linvill and Eddie Paruchabutr. I guess I can say that because I promoted him not too long ago for being up here. But it's also, for me, it's a symbol of the fact that, and I'll talk this a little bit earlier, this is a team sport. We're already working with both these folks on some of these problems and have been as we get into these discussions. So thanks for taking the time to be part of that. I would be remiss if I didn't wish General Lawrence a happy birthday. I won't make everybody sing to you.
And it's also General Engel's birthday, so this is a great day.
And that's why I didn't think it would be a good idea to sing to her, because you were singing to her, you'd be singing to me too, and I'm not looking for that. Okay, but appreciate the opportunity to say some words this morning, and thanks to the leadership here of AUSA. And I do want to say right up front, I know my boss is here. Thanks to General Fogarty for his leadership in this space. We've spent about the last 14 months really digging into this problem, and he has pushed us to get after it, and I think that's exactly what we're doing. So the benefit of following your boss and your boss's boss is I don't really have to explain to this group the importance of converging information operations, cyber, and EW. And when we talk about information operations, we're really talking about the synchronization of all the IRCs, and that includes civil affairs, includes PSYOPs, includes PAO, as was mentioned earlier, space, intel, and signal. So as General Fogarty talked about, our problem is simple in statements, but complex in execution. How do we sense, understand, decide, and act faster than our adversaries in the information environment, in competition and in conflict, to enable multi-domain operations? I think our immediate challenge right now is in the competition space, where our adversaries are achieving strategic objectives that was mentioned earlier by General Nakasone, in the space short of conflict, without fighting. A key component of this strategy is what is termed as information warfare, where the ones and zeros that our adversaries are moving through cyberspace are not necessarily turning things on and turning things off. These ones and zeros are moving information, and this information is changing behaviors and beliefs, and in most cases that's more powerful than turning things on and turning things off. To effectively compete in the information environment, and that's not just countering what our adversaries are doing, because countering isn't inherently reactive. We must seize the initiative. We must own the narrative. We must expand the concept of persistent engagement that was discussed this morning by General Nakasone. In cyberspace, we believe we need to expand that to persistent engagement in the information environment. And then through the synchronization and integration of the capabilities I mentioned earlier, we can impose a cost on our adversaries. I would offer that in no other domain or environment will we allow the enemy to seize and retain the initiative. So why should we allow them to do that in the information environment? So at Army Cyber, we've been studying this problem pretty intently, like I talked about, for about the last 14 months. How do we synchronize these capabilities in support of multi-domain operation? We've authored an in-depth study on information warfare and are working on the concept of maneuver in the information environment. Through General Fogarty's leadership, we're transforming our command, and we're integrated with our Army teammates at TRADOC, FORCECOM, and Army Futures Command to develop the right concepts, capabilities, organizations, and doctrine to win in this fight. So I'm going to offer just a couple of things that we've learned along the way. Some of the steps we've taken to get after these challenges, and then finally I'll stop with how do I think industry can help us. So first and foremost, what I discussed earlier is integrating these capabilities is a team sport. All right, it will take a total Army solution to do it most effectively. It's going to include Compo 2 and Compo 3. and it's going to include our all-soft teammates. But I would also offer this is just bigger than an Army problem. As we talk about competing effectively in information environment, it'll take a joint, it'll take an interagency, I would offer a whole of government and a whole of nation, and to include allies and partners' effort to compete in this space effectively. We need to increase our leader education at all levels of PME, so leader training, development, and education in synchronizing and utilizing these capabilities. We need to develop leaders and commanders, a mindset and a culture where they can understand how to leverage these capabilities to gain and maintain an advantage over our adversaries. We've learned that we need more depth in our exercises at all levels to be able to fully exercise the synchronization of these capabilities. And that needs to be exercised in both conflict and competition scenarios. And we have to force ourselves to operate it in contested and congested environments. We've made some significant progress of that at our CTCs, but we've probably still got some work to do. We've also learned that our authorities to operate in the information environment are adequate, but in some cases we hold them at too high a level and are too centralized. It's 2019. It still can't be true that it's easier to drop a bomb on somebody to send them a leaflet or an email, but in many cases that is true. We need to get to a place where we have message release authority, where our commanders on the ground, like they can call in fires to support their element, they can release a message into the information environment. And we've learned that the information environment is probably more durable than we think, and that we need to have greater conversations about operating in that environment in terms of risk. And it's just not the risk of operating in the information environment, it's the risk of inaction. What's the risk of not operating in the information environment and ceding that space to our adversaries? And if we're going to operate in that environment like we need to, then we as commanders have to be able to underwrite that risk, because we're going to make mistakes in that environment, and we're going to make sure our junior leaders understand it's okay. They can make mistakes and they can continue to operate. So the good news is that we recognize a lot of these challenges and we're trying to get after them. The Army's doing some great work, and here's just a couple examples of that. So we're developing and fielding the next generation of EW systems. As mentioned earlier, we've built a cyber branch, and now we've integrated electronic warfare into that, and we're considering the potential of integrating information operations into that branch as well. The Army's developed what they call the I2Qs, so intel, information, electronic warfare, cyber, and space elements that is nested inside the multi-domain task force. That element that's intended to penetrate A280 formations and disintegrate those formations. It's up, it's running, it's being exercised in the PACOM-OR, and it's doing some great work. We're building SEMA cells into our BCTs, our divisions, and our corps and our ASCCs. So we're building an organic element that's going to help integrate these capabilities into our tactical levels. And then we're also looking at adding an information operations component into that that would fully integrate all of those capabilities. We're building EW platoons into our BCTs, and we're building EW companies into our MI brigades at the corps level. And then finally, we're developing future concepts and strategies that will integrate all of these capabilities to fully flush out and support multi-dam operations. And most importantly, this doctrine and these strategies that we're developing are all informed by repetitions that we're getting downrange in places like Afghanistan. So finally, for our industry partners, how can you help? General Fogarty mentioned a couple of these this morning, and I think they're important to mention again because I think these are some of our biggest challenges. The first one is help us operate at the scale, the volume, and the velocity that our adversaries do in the information environment. We like to call it at the speed of relevance. Second is help us better integrate commercial intelligence with our own collected intelligence so we can see their adversaries and we can see ourselves better. And finally, how can we take all of this information and how can we put that into a common operational picture that our commanders can utilize to target more effectively in an information environment? And I look forward to taking your comments or questions. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. On behalf of Lieutenant General Francis Baudet, Commanding General, United States Army Special Operations Command, thank you, General Lawrence, Brigadier General Engel, AUSA, Army Cyber, for the opportunity for me to represent USASOC at this panel. USASOC is a committed partner with Army Cyber to advance this critical issue. It is my intent within the next few minutes to highlight key aspects of how Army Special Operations are tied into this overall discussion and why Lieutenant General Baudet has made enabling RSOF soldiers to dominate information within their operational areas one of his 4 priorities for Army Special Operations Command. I'll begin with a brief overview of USASOC formation, followed by capabilities, and finish by highlighting several specific examples of how we are advancing our abilities to operate in the information environment. Again, along with General Nakasomi's comments this morning, it really dives into how we're integrating with schools and training, synthetic platforms, and how we're nested with development of a doctrine and strategies at echelon. Army Special Operations Forces provide the Army and Joint Force unique capabilities to operate with and through indigenous forces, understand and wield influence, and execute precision targeting and crisis response. On any given day, approximately 4,000 Army Special Operations soldiers are deployed in more than 70 countries worldwide across all 6 geographic combatant commands. Army Special Operations Commands consists of 4 component commands and units. First, we have our schoolhouse, U.S. Army JFK Special Warfare Center and School. This command assesses, selects, trains, and generates 3 Army career field managements. Okay? They are the Special Forces, Civil Affairs, and Psychological Operations Regiments. Next is our 1st Special Forces Command. This is the operational command that consists of 11 brigade-size elements of Special Forces, Psychological Operations, Civil Affairs, and the 528th Sustainment Brigade. We also have the Army Special Operations Aviation Command. Again, this command generates, trains, and provides SOF-capable aviation in support of operations worldwide. And last but certainly not least, the 75th Ranger Regiment. This is an elite infantry operating force that specializes in joint forcible entry operations and direct action raids. And from these 4 components, I like to reiterate and highlight aspects of RSOF capabilities that enable our Army to operate in a contested and congested information environment. First, Army Special Operations operate with and through an indigenous approach. We leverage nascent capabilities within the populations to transform indigenous mass into combat power, and we absolutely include information as a critical aspect of combat power. Our network of allies and international partnerships can generate an early understanding of emerging local, regional, and trans-regional threats and find opportunities to advance U.S. interests. We develop understanding and wield influence. This capability describes the advanced understanding of cultural, political, and other environmental complexities gained through persistent RSOF engagement in countries around the world. Our requirements in language, cultural, and behavioral proficiencies enable RSOF to help local populations favorably influence security conditions in their region. And I'd like to redouble a key concept, that RSOF efforts are focused on leveraging information-related capabilities to execute special operations missions. These missions include foreign internal defense, unconventional warfare, direct action, strategic reconnaissance, military information support operations, and civil affairs. A couple of these specific examples I'd like to highlight is first and foremost that USASOC units are now participating and will continue to participate in every combat training center rotation and warfighter exercise. Again, this was not the case with the pace of operations and our commitments into support deployments worldwide. Our CG has mandated that every rotation is supported by SOF units, integrating with conventional forces and executed with organic and external cyber, EW, PSYOP, CA, and other information-related capabilities. Next, USASOC receives incredible support from our cyber formations in replicating near-peer information environments against our internal formations. As addressed earlier, this is an absolutely critical capability on how we look at ourselves. How do our formations look before we go into a combat training center? Because we know that the competition is here now, that our enemies are looking at our formations across the United States. The same goes on the other side. USASOC units actively participate in cyber-themed exercises such as the current Cyber Blitz that's going on right now in Fort Dix. And last but certainly not least, one of the best examples I'd like to highlight for SOF and conventional force integration is the establishment of the Advanced Tactical Technology course. This is an Army-funded course taught at the JFK Special Warfare Center and School. ATTIC trains soldiers to defend, inform, and exploit within the digital terrain through advanced knowledge of computer systems and social media platforms. It's important to note that this course did not attempt to replicate the 6-month 17 series training done at Fort Gordon. And ATTIC is approximately 30 days to train special operations and conventional soldiers on basic digital force protection, targeting, and subnet target isolation and analysis. It is designed as an additional skill identifier for non-cyber personnel to enable capabilities at the unit level. Again, the key element of this course is that any Army soldier, conventional or SOF, can take this course. It is listed in our internal Army training catalog, otherwise known as ATARs, right? And units can send their soldiers if they meet the prerequisites. Lastly, as we continue to learn and discuss in this panel, I'd like to add that effective influence is just more than bringing information-related capabilities online and into the informational environment. That effective influence is the combination of the technical capabilities and behavioral, cultural, language expertise enabled by bold and innovative leaders. Our leaders must understand the information environment and embrace the body of work through our cyber's foundational study. I'm a big fan of the joint concept of operating in the information environment, or the JCOE, and the joint concept for integrated campaigning. Hopefully I was able to highlight some successes at the tactical and echelon, but really, as General Engel said, how does this scale into the larger effort? And hopefully with this start, it's a good segue to Dr. Linvill's comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Eddie. It's a real honor to be here today. Thanks, everybody. So Patrick Warren and I have been leading efforts at Clemson University for the past couple of years to better understand the tactics and strategy of online disinformation, specifically focused on what used to be called the Internet Research Agency in Russia and other state-sponsored backers of disinformation. A couple of caveats for my comments. One, our work is largely based off of open source content, and our understanding of disinformation is based off of that. I always get nervous when I talk to a room full of uniforms like this because I don't know what I don't know. But I do know that I have read Russian tweets until my eyes bleed. And to the point where my dean has voiced concern for my mental health. And I humor myself that has given me at least some understanding of what we're dealing with. I would also supply the caveat that a lot of our understanding is based off of what's happening on Twitter specifically. That is the one platform that has supplied any meaningful public source data for academics like myself to look at and examine and build an understanding. We would sure love data sets from other platforms, but they're keeping their data close to the chest. But I will say we've recently started to come into some non-open source data, and it's shown me that without question, what's happening on Twitter is a good proxy for what these bad actors are doing on other platforms as well. Obviously, there's important tactical differences between how the different platforms operate and how they utilize them. But at the strategic level, their efforts are very much the same between platforms. What I wanted to talk about today was a little about how this is, no question, a contested and congested environment, but right now it seems to be more congested than contested. Certainly, I think when the textbook is written 20 years from now, the past couple of years are going to be looked back as the moment that everybody jumped in on the disinformation game from around the globe, from China and Venezuela to Iran and Bangladesh and Catalan. And I think it's very important when you consider the number of actors in this space to understand the differences in how those actors operate and the differences in the type of disinformation that they're using. I think people have a tendency to lump disinformation into one broad category, when in fact it's very different things, depending on the needs of the state actor that's producing it. At Clemson, we like to categorize disinformation into two broad categories: offensive and defensive. The vast majority of disinformation right now is defensive. So, for instance, following the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, the Saudis tweeted out with a couple of thousand bots about how obviously Saudi Arabia wasn't responsible for that killing. That wasn't because they were trying to change anybody's minds. They were just trying to game an algorithm so that certain conversations wouldn't happen. That's a good example of defensive disinformation. Other defensive disinformation that's very common is what we see coming out of China right now. There was just recently a large release from Facebook and Twitter of data from a Chinese operation focusing on Hong Kong. They talked about a couple of other things as well. And I've looked a good bit at data sets supplied by Twitter regarding disinformation coming out of Iran. Both of these operations seem to be largely just extensions of state media for all intents and purposes. Very traditional propaganda. They talk about things that are of importance to those nation states. You see similar sort of defensive operations from Venezuela. Venezuela was doing two things, or in the past, I should say, past couple of years, they've done two things. They've focused on disinformation in Spanish, focused at their own people, as many other nations have done. But their outward-focused accounts communicating to Americans were mostly just monetized, seemed to be raising money for their internal operations. You may not realize it, but one of the top 10 conservative news pages on Twitter in 2018 was seemingly run by the Venezuelan government. So but that is fundamentally just another form of defensive disinformation. They weren't overtly trying to change anybody's minds. It may have happened here in the States, but really they were just monetizing the platform for their own ends. Offensive disinformation, you can probably guess where I'm going, is what the Russians do. They obviously have some defensive as well, but they have decided it's in their best interest to mess with us, pushing the political conversations in this country into polarizing different directions, making it more difficult for us to govern our own country. As we like to say at Clemson, the more we're talking about what's happening on our border, the less we're talking about what's happening on the Ukrainian border. And that is in Putin's best interest. And it's fundamentally an offensive operation. Russian accounts don't necessarily talk about things, or I should say most Russian accounts don't necessarily talk about things of interest to the Russian government any more than other politically active Twitter or other platform users do. But those types of operations take a lot more effort. It's taken the Russians several years to get to the capacity and the ability that they have now, because there's significant cultural issues when you're talking about engaging with very particular communities in very particular ways, and they've gotten really good at it, just astoundingly good at it. Their accounts that they build, I just gave some to Twitter last week, they're artisanal in their quality, and their ability to gain followers is outrageous. It takes a lot of effort, both in building that capacity and in maintaining those accounts. But at the end of the day, it's extremely cheap for them. Their operation is cheap. Any response we're going to have is going to be expensive. And certainly the platforms don't seem to be willing to spend that money at the moment until we make them. I say it's artisanal, but like Panera Bread, it's artisanal at an industrial level, because they make a lot of this stuff. My concern moving forward, the thing that scares me, is other nation states getting involved in that sort of offensive capability. I haven't seen anybody that's capable of it to the extent that the Russians seem to be at the moment, but I've seen hints that more and more actors are doing it. Just in the recent Chinese release, there was one account out of several hundred was clearly aimed at Americans and not talking about things that were of interest to the Chinese, but talking about things that were of interest to Americans. And that concerns me. I'll leave the rest of the time for comments and questions.
Thank you very much, panel. Some great observations there. So I'm going to stay with you, Dr. Linvill. It's interesting that we got a question in about Ukraine, and that Russians has used social media in Ukraine to target individual soldiers by creating perceptions of family issues back home. Do you see any of that happening here with our soldiers in the United States?
I haven't seen it. Clearly, everything the Russians did started in their own country, and specifically in the Ukraine, of publicly available data from Twitter that is attributed to the Internet Research Agencies and their various spinoffs today. There are a couple million tweets in English, about and I read them all, God help me. A million or so in other various languages: German, Italian, French, Arabic. This is they spread the gamut. They're attacking all Western democracies. But 6 million of them are in Russian or Ukrainian, targeting either their own people or people just over the border. Most of what I see them doing in English isn't targeting specific service members. It may be happening. As I said, I have a very blinkered view, only being able to look at publicly available data and what we're able to identify ourselves. But I know they are targeting particular Americans, but not particular service members. They definitely target the police and other individuals, especially some of their more left-leaning themed accounts. Mm-hmm. Particular members of the police force, I mean, not in general.
Yeah. Colonel Paruchabutr, do you see anything in your environment that you've been working?
When we talk about identity management, right, this is an absolutely critical skill that we teach all the way across our formations. Right? Before training, before we go out on deployments, right, we have teams that look at internally within our formations, and more importantly, it's about awareness. Just like I said, it's awareness that these activities are happening at the individual soldier level, and more importantly, it's how it affects the soldiers' families. Okay, we have to be cognizant that even if it's not targeting just soldier X or unit Y, these accounts, right, these online activities are targeted at general Americans, and it further polarizes our divisions. Right, healthy debate is good, but regular civilians or a soldier within unit, the Russians doesn't matter. If it's red, if it's spread, right, if it causes further political division within the units, it has an effect, and we are absolutely cognizant of that, and we teach all soldiers within RSOF that these activities are happening.
Wow, that's very interesting. Yes, sir.
I was speaking, they don't seem to be targeting particular members of the service, but they definitely target service members. If you want to get followers on Twitter, you either pretend to be a member of the military or you pretend to be an attractive 23-year-old woman.
Yeah, so if I could make comment on there, and that's where I was going to head. So the answer is yes. And so there's really two categories we've put them in, and I know that Dr. Nadya Bliss was going to be part of this panel. I know she had to pull out her, and then Arizona State University writ large are doing some great work on weaponizing the narrative initiative, and we've had some in-depth discussions with them on how do we protect our own formations. If the U.S. Army is a reflection of society and the Russians are doing identity-based targeting, well, then they're targeting our folks. And so we have to make the assumption that's happening, and we have to do a better job of preparing our folks and making them understand that this, in fact, could be happening. That's one bucket. The other bucket is if you're that BCT in Poland or you're that SOF team in Ukraine, how are they identifying those soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines that are there, and then targeting specifically those families based upon the operations that they're in? And that can cause some fairly significant issues as well. So it's happening, and we got to do a better job of defending our soldiers.
And sometimes it's not even the traditional kind of big fight where there is an operation on of some kind. Sometimes it's things as simple as there's a hurricane. Pay very close attention every time that there's some type of natural disaster and how many sites pop up literally overnight. Donate X, Y, and Z to soldiers, and then on the backside you find out, well, they're not really who they said they were, and so absolutely it's the traditional targeting, but there are other things kind of at play here, just literally right under our noses, where right at the point of impact, we're ready to give. A natural disaster just occurred, but oh, by the way, that site's not even a real site. I just offer that as additional food for thought to make the point.
I would add, Bruce, that our boss, General Ham, has at least 4 Facebook accounts out there, and Dick, you probably have several too. Yep.
And I'm not sure how we're defending against it.
Well, one of the things that's happening, and I won't speak for Jack Shanahan, who runs the Joint AI effort at the DoD level, but he's identified several national mission initiatives. This actually was one of the social media aspect, was actually one of the national mission initiatives that Jack has taken on.
That's a good one. The next 2 questions were addressed to General Engel, but you may want to phone a friend, like your boss, to help you answer this one. When will the Army complete the cyber EWIO convergence strategy and supporting doctrine and TTPs? Would seem to be an important take for Information Warfare Command that General Fogarty has briefed in opening remarks and presented at TechNet. And then a follow-on question, a little different, is have we reached the point where Intel, Signal, Cyber, IO, EW should all combine into a single Information warfighting function. So, would you like to start, sir?
Yes. At the risk of not being fired today, I was certainly hand it over to my boss at some point, but I'll do my best to answer those. So the first one is, I believe, was the convergence of the strategies. So that's happening right now under the leadership here of Adam Nucci, who's sitting just behind General Crawford. We're working with their team to take the cyber, EW, and SIGINT strategies that have already been developed and are now working toward an implementation plan. And we're utilizing some of our information warfare study concepts inside of there to help integrate IO into that, eventually combining all of those strategies. In addition to that, we're working with our TRADOC and our Army Future counterparts in doing a capabilities-based assessment on what it would take to develop additional capabilities to synchronize IO, EW, and cyber, and then how those could inform the next version of multi-domain operations. And then finally, we're also working with Adam Nucci's team to help build a strategic framework under which all of these capabilities would be integrated. So those efforts are ongoing. There's been some tremendous work that's been done. And so very proud of those efforts, but there is a sense of urgency and need for speed. Because as we develop these doctrines, as we develop these concepts, we have to recognize that this threat is here and it's today. It's not theoretical. And so we need to move faster to putting in the right capabilities, organizations, and doctrine to get after it. There's been discussions on information as a warfighting function. It's currently a joint function. Other services have made a function. Right now, it's an element of combat power for the Army, but that's very significant. So it's on par with leadership when it comes to its function to integrate the other 6 warfighting functions. So the Army already recognizes the importance of information. Does it end up being a warfighting function? I'll let CAC and those folks handle that as they continue to work through the process. And then I will, if General Fogarty wants to make any comments about the future of Army Cyber Command, because I know he's discussed that in the past.
No, Rick actually covered all this very well. I would just add two things. One is we kind of kicked the can, and what we found is there were a lot of people that were interested in partnering with us. So as we started to grip this and get after it, because frankly it was our mission set. I was responsible for all 3. We had focused principally on cyber for many years. We carved out some space for EW once we saw Russian use of those capabilities in the Ukraine. And what we recognize is we had to open the aperture, once again for IO, because we had kind of neglected that, as an Army. So it was very important to get this together. But the Army has certain processes that actually work really well. TRADOC is a machine, and once you get it into them, then they'll pick it up and they'll start to drive it, which is much better than us. What I want to do is I want to influence the outcome through our experience, because we are very active in this space. But I want Neil Hersey and his team. I want Mike Lundy and his team out at CAC to do the heavy lifting for all the doctrinal concepts that General Nakasone talked about earlier this morning. We are going to have to get after the big idea. Do we bring all this together in a branch? But we're going to let TRADOC. We'll have an opinion, but we're going to let TRADOC lead that effort. That way it's much more holistic as we work our way through. Now, one of the things we learned with the electronic warfare merger is that it was probably a great example of kind of tribal conflict. And what we ended up with, which was a compromise, as these things generally end, is it was focus on maintaining the electronic warfare capability and not the functional area. And we had gotten into this kind of binary discussion of, well, in order to keep capability, you had to keep the functional area. We said, no, actually, we don't have to do that. And if we get that behind us, then we can bring the team together and we can start working and getting after this much faster. And I think that's been has been proven out. So we're going to see where this leads, and we'll let Neil Hershey, Mike Lundy, and the team do that. I think that as far as the name, you've heard me. We've been pretty provocative. Information Warfare Command instead of Army Cyber, as we move down to Fort Gordon. We've actually had a discussion with the chief a couple weeks ago. Actually, it's a very positive discussion. He's asked us to accelerate our efforts, accelerate bringing the team together to get after this. But I think he's rightfully not pinned himself down at this point. So we're gonna bring a range of options. And as I said at the beginning, that's really what I get paid to do, is provide a range of options to our commanders. In this case, we're going to provide a range of options to the Army senior leadership, and then with partners, with AFC, with CAC, with TRADOC, then they'll pull that together, and the chief will ultimately make the decision on what the name is going to be. But the Army senior leadership certainly understands the importance of this. They also understand that we're actively operating in the information environment today. One of the things I think we really have to get our hands around is, more than the name, more than the tribal colors and affiliation and all that, is it's actually getting after it, conducting operations and learning from that. So I think that's the good news story. In some cases, it's pretty nascent. In some cases, we built off of some commercial capabilities, some capabilities from academia. There's an acquisition strategy that's part of this also. What is that platform going to look like? What does situational understanding in the information environment, what does that actually mean? What does that look like? And that's something that commanders are going to have to drive. And to that end, the decision that the Secretary made last year to stand up the SEMA cells at every BCT, Division Corps, and ASCC, we think in the early discussion we've had is those will evolve to information warfare cells probably sooner than later, and we'll have IO expertise that's on those. And then you have that full-time staff for those commanders that can start pulling all of this together. And then we're not the only show in town, so that's where our space guys, our PSYOPs guys, civil affairs, intel guys, signal guys, they'll all wrap their hands into this. So it's very early in this process. I think we've gotten the right attention, and we've gotten good initial guidance to start to move out. And what you're going to see over the next few months are some decisions on naming potential assimilation from different tribes into other tribes. What we said from the very beginning, matter of fact, one of our first get-togethers on this was we went down to USASOC and said, look, who are the big players in this? Who have the most equities? Well, it's USASOC. And we went down, we broke bread at the tribal table with General Beaudet and his team. Rick and I flew down to do that and said, look, this is not about taking over your tribe or stealing your cheese. Really, what we want to do is we want to figure out how we can work together effectively. So you integrate our capabilities. And what General Beaudet said was, hey, that sounds good to me. Let's establish a pilot. We'll pull all of this together, and then we'll start building reps. And that's what we've done in Afghanistan. And we have learned a lot from that we think is applicable to almost any area of the world that we would operate in. Now, it's very data centric. Matter of fact, we're getting ready to push a bunch of ORSAs, data scientists over there to help us optimize the data we're collecting, the data we're generating today, and that will happen here probably in the next week or so, and it's to answer a very specific requirement. So that will drive to some type of platform. So there is going to be an acquisition requirement to make sure that we have what we need. And one of the things I'm going to tell you is we're looking for commercial capabilities. We're looking for capabilities from academia to help us refine and then build that capability. So a lot of potential as we move forward.
For our last question, I'd like each of you to comment on, what are some of the military implications of the emerging deep fake technology? You want to start?
Okay. Military implication of deepfake technology. So the first one is the use of it. So it can support military deception operations. It's something that we have to, I think, embrace and be prepared to utilize in a military deception concept or operation. Second one is how do we identify it? And I know that we're working with some of our partners to identify, how do we determine what is a deep fake? And I don't think it's just about deep fakes. I think it's about what was discussed earlier, and General Isaacson ended with the question of data veracity. How do we ensure that the data that is inside our COP that commanders are looking at is actually true? That's Pandora's box. Because if you're sitting there as a commander and you no longer trust that information that's in front of you, you're back to a map board and some grease pencils. So that's something that we need to spend a lot of time looking at. It's important, but we shouldn't be afraid to use it and embrace it, but we got to be able to identify it and defend against it as well.
Thank you. And it's a great topic because the technology is here. And again, for the audience in this room and for my colleagues in the Joint Staff, OSC, and policy, please look at policies to enable our formations to experiment, because we have incredible soldiers down at the unit levels that can do this now, right? Or they do it at home. That's right. Okay, I'm going to say it. Right. We have incredible soldiers at our formations, but when we're looking for policies to enable our formations to experiment and innovate with this technology.
I can't speak to the possible impact of deepfakes on military operational level, but in terms of disinformation, I honestly believe that deepfakes are blown up to too great a proportion. I'm not particularly worried about them. Certainly not to the degree that they've been discussed. I think that fake news in general isn't the problem it used to be, and to the degree that it is a problem, according to all recent research, there are a couple of studies about this in Science recently. It's fake news is only a problem among baby boomers. We've been teaching digital literacy to college students and not in retirement homes. And you can see that in the efforts of professional disinformation, state-sponsored disinformation. The IRA tried fake news back in 2014, and it failed miserably. Because as much as we like to say we don't trust the media in this country, we actually do more than we actually admit to, and fake news might have an effect on the peripheries. And when I say fake news, I include deep fakes in that. But I don't think anybody who doesn't already believe the perspective being voiced is going to be persuaded by deep fakes. I think that funny memes are going to continue to be far more of a problem than deep fakes, because they work.
Thank you. With our few minutes left, I'm going to ask our panel chair to wrap up our panel for us today.
Thanks, General Lawrence. And thanks again for our panel members, Eddie and Dr. Linvill, being part of this. General Lawrence, thanks for moderating our panel, and thanks for your interest in this topic. I just want to end with one topic, and that's people. General Crawford talked about it earlier. In this space that we're discussing, we tend to default immediately to technology. We default to it's about machine learning, it's about AI, it's about the network, and all of that's true. But at the end of the day, we will be successful or not successful in a contested or congested information environment based upon the people that we have. It will the people that we recruit, assess, select, train, educate, develop, and retain that are needed to do this, whether it's cyber, whether it's EW, whether it's IO. It's going to take a very talented group of individuals that we're going to have to compete for that talent in the market space. But ultimately, they are the ones that will ensure that we are successful or not successful. So as we continue to talk about this topic, let's not forget about, at the end of the day, it is about people. And thanks again for your listening to our panel. Appreciate it.
Here, here. Cool.